Hey, I bet you have one of these too. I love having my sketchbook with me because it gives me a good place to record my life, to stay present, but also to stay at the top of my creativity, even though I might not have time to do large pieces of artwork. However, I will confess, if you look back at my earlier sketchbooks, you would notice a distinct lack of sketches, including buildings, cars, or anything that required the use of perspective. I just wasn't confident in how to go about drawing those subject matters. If you are the same way, then watch today's video because I will cover how to go about drawing anything that requires simple perspective. So let's dive right in. So regardless of what I'm drawing, my first phase is always the underdrawing, where I just put some blobs down, giving me a location on the page for the house or the forest or whatever. And then I have to think about that this is basically a box and have to figure out my height, depth, and width lines. And I always begin with my height line, that yellow one closest to me. Once I've planted that line on the page, I need to figure out where my horizon line is. If I'm working from a photograph, you find two receding edges, use your pencils and see how they converge, and that will give you your horizon line. You can also pretend, if you're on location, to close one eye and shoot an imaginary laser beam out of the other eye. And wherever that laser beam falls, that will be your horizon line. So again, I begin with the horizon line and the closest to me vertical. Once I have that, I look a little bit at the angles of the receding edges, a little bit closer. And I like to imagine like I have a clock face in front of me, and the angles are handles on that clock face. And so I'm transferring those angles from the top of the photograph to my drawing. And I do this on location as well. Again, I close one eye when I do this, I stick out my arm, and then I align my pencil with the angle that I see. And I do my best to be pretty accurate with that. So notice how these angles start to intersect with that horizon line, and hopefully they will both intersect at the same point on the horizon line. And that delivers me my first vanishing point. So now I know that all edges that are going off to the left will go to the same vanishing point that I just plotted out. And then I'll do the same thing on the right side. I'm seeing with that clock face idea where the angles on the right side intersect with the horizon line, giving me my right vanishing point. And that's why it's so important that we start with the horizon line, because those two vanishing points need to sit on that same horizon line. They cannot be on two different levels. And it happens quite often that your vanishing points are not on the page that you're drawing on. So since I'm on a big sketch pad, I can draw my vanishing points on the board. But if you have a teeny tiny sketch book, you often will just have to aim at a spot that's kind of off in the air, and you just have to kind of aim for the same spot over and over again. Now that I have my must-have starting points, I'm starting to work on the side-to-side relationships. How much of the left side do I see in comparison to the right side? If you need a refresher on how to measure increments, check out my Better Proportions series, which I will link to in the description below. Now, one thing I will recommend is that you always check that your verticals are actually upright and that you use your edges of the paper to ensure that. Because if your verticals aren't upright, it'll really throw things off. Now let's take a look at how to create the accurate peak of a roof line. For that, you want to use the Xing method. So you choose a face of the building, connect the opposing corners, and then drive a vertical through the intersection. And along that vertical, you can build your peak of the roof. And as long as you have that vertical placed well, you can play with how tall you want to make that roof. I could make it taller than I really needed to just by aiming my angles at that vertical line. But here I'm actually measuring how tall it was. And just in case you're wondering why I am treating the roof edges slightly different than the house edges, meaning why aren't they going to the vanishing points I established, it's because I basically ask myself, do the edges that I'm drawing adhere to the box idea? Or are they different angles that I can't see on the box. And those roof edges, they are cut at a different angle than a regular box is. That's why I can't just bring them to a vanishing point. I have to construct it. Because remember, on our boxes we only have height, width, and depth. And those roof angles, that's a whole nother story, different angle. So how do we know where to end the roof line? That corner, how do I get that? All right, we do the same thing just on the back edge. And for that, we have to construct the footprint of the house. Once I have my hidden back edge, I cross the back wall, drive a vertical through that, and that gives me then the vertical that will be the end point of my roof. Now, how about that attachment piece on the front of the house, that little entryway? Again, I come back to my X'd out front face because that will be the beginning of that little box. And as with any box, I begin with my closest vertical and then check out the left to right relationships. It's always the same. That's why it's becoming easy now that I have a method. Once I have my side to side relationship, to find the peak of the little entryway, I X that front face, draw a vertical through it, and find how tall the peak of that little roof line is in the front. So at this point, I pretty much have my big forms laid in. I'm working on some of the surrounding landscape here, and then I'm making sure that my lines read clearly. And after that, I will start to deal with some smaller details within those big forms, like windows and any other surface details that might stand out to me. The thing you want to look out for with details is that you organize it well. So in this case of the bell tower, I made sure that I'm continuing up my X'd out halfway point from the front face to make sure that they look even. And then on the side, I made sure that those windows arrange properly with the proportions in mind. Of course, I also made sure that the bottoms of the windows all sit on the same line, going to that same vanishing point on the right-hand side. That's what I mean by being organized. So even if you have a small little detail like the door on the front, the bottom of that door goes to the same vanishing point on the left. And when I have too much perspective on my mind, I go back to the landscape just to kind of shake it all off again. And by the way, that yield sign there, that doesn't go to any vanishing point on the horizon line because that's leaning. It's not an upright item, so I'm just kind of winging that one. Phew, that was it. That's all the heavy lifting, and now I can basically just ink in all the hard work that I did and maybe even put a splash of color on it later on. And that's it. So you really just have to put in some work in the beginning of your drawing, deciding that you'll slow down, that you'll pay your due diligence, making sure that everything will look structured, but it will pay off because then when you put your color on it and your inking marks, nothing will feel like it's wobbly. It will really feel solid and sound. So to review, we begin with a gesture. After that, we get our horizon line figured out, check our vanishing points on the page, get the left-right relationships, and organize all the major structural things. And then you can have fun and let loose again. I hope this was helpful for the next time you go sketching in the field, so now you know how to tackle those pesky buildings too. See you next time.